Thank you so much. This is definitely an honor. I truly appreciate you coming on the platform.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I'm definitely interested in today's discussion. So for the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are and definitely where you're from?
I'm from the United States, from Yale University, and I work in this field called experimental philosophy. So it's a field that's kind of at the intersection of psychology and philosophy, kind of working on questions about how the study of how people really think and feel can relate to questions that we face in philosophy.
Wow, wow. That's very, very interesting. Now I wanted to ask you this. When did you actually develop a passion for things like philosophy and psychology?
Well, maybe even back in high school, of course, I was very interested in that sort of thing, but it was more in college or some around there that it really crystallized. But at the time, maybe like many college kids at that time, I felt sort of this passion for questions in philosophy, but at the same time, a lot of doubt about the idea of pursuing a career in academic philosophy. That I sort of felt like maybe going to academia, becoming a professor, I would be, I don't know, cutting myself off from what's really important in life and just entering some weird ivory tower where I wouldn't be connecting with the things that really matter to people. So maybe at that time, like the earliest time I was connected with philosophy, I had this all this ambivalence of this love for philosophy, but at the same time this fear of like becoming someone who just thought about abstract questions that don't matter to anyone.
Yeah, yeah, I can dig it. I mean, philosophy is important and psychology is important. You know, we hear these terms a lot, but for the average person, you know, what exactly is the difference between the two?
Well, that's a great question. So if you go back in the history of these things, in the 19th century, there wasn't really a real distinction between these things. There were these people who were really pursuing questions that involved both. So if you think about these figures in the 19th century, like Nietzsche, Marx, Kierkegaard, John Stuart Mill, these were people who were thinking questions about the mind. How does the human mind work? And they were also thinking about questions about what that means for something larger. Like when we learn facts about what the mind, how the mind works, what does that teach us about how we should live, whether there's a God, what it means for the nature of art, for society, and so forth. And then in the early 20th century, this larger kind of inquiry began to split up into two separate disciplines. So, on one hand, there are these people in these new kinds of departments, what were called psychology departments, that were just concerned with scientific questions about how the mind actually works. And they began thinking, okay, we're just going to run these experimental studies. We're just going to figure this stuff out. Like, what's actually going on in people's minds? How do their emotions work? How do people think? And so forth. And we're going to study that using scientific methods. And then there also began to be this movement within philosophy to think maybe we can have a form of philosophy where we just don't talk about any of that stuff anymore. We're not making claims about how people's minds work. We're going to be able to figure out the answers to these questions, as it were, from the armchair without thinking about that kind of stuff at all. And so there was this birth of this approach to philosophy that was kind of divorced from psychology in the way that they had been connected before, where people started thinking we can have some way of figuring out how we should live, about the nature of art, about the nature of friendship, and so forth, in a way that doesn't involve making claims or trying to investigate the nature of the mind, of how people think or how people feel.
Wow, okay. I appreciate you taking the time to break that down. Now I kind of wanted to go into the philosophy a little bit more. In some of your videos you talk about philosophy of the mind. So is that kind of an extension of that, or is that just a part of it, or?
Oh, you mean within philosophy, there are all sorts of different areas that people have studied. So people are working on questions about moral philosophy, philosophy of art, philosophy of religion. And one of these areas is what's called philosophy of mind, where people study the mind. And then All of these different areas of philosophy, though, I think can hopefully be informed by questions about the mind. So, philosophy of mind can obviously be informed by thinking about how people's minds really work. But similarly, if we want to do moral philosophy, political philosophy, philosophy of art, philosophy of even, I don't know, um, epistemology, all of these things we can probably um, gain some insight into them by thinking about questions about how people's minds actually work.
Okay, okay. Now, you had touched on something earlier, experimental philosophy. What exactly is that, and what role do you play in that field?
Well, experimental philosophy is a movement that started around the beginning of the 21st century, so a little more than 20 years ago. And it was a movement that started out with people who had sort of been in departments of philosophy, who they thought they're supposed to be studying these kind of age-old questions of philosophy, the kind of questions that you see in Plato and Aristotle, all the way through these figures that I was just mentioning in the 19th century. But people start to think maybe we can make some progress on those questions by using the kind of experimental methods that we see coming out in psychology. So these are people in the world of philosophy, but are thinking maybe we can use psychological methods to make progress on philosophical questions. And in particular, they were thinking maybe we can use psychological methods in a very specific way. So if you go back even to the earliest days of philosophy, to the days of, say, Plato, what you'd see is this type of inquiry in which Plato would announce some question like, ultimately, what is justice? And then he'd give you a little story like, imagine this happened and this happened and this happened. What would be just to do? Okay, now let's change the story. Imagine it was this and this. Now what would be just? And by exploring the reactions we have to these little stories, his suggestion was we can get some insight into the nature of justice, what justice is. And experimental philosophy is a new movement that approaches that kind of age old way of doing philosophy, but now using the kind of experimental methods associated with psychology. So experimental philosophers don't just say, okay, imagine this case. In this case, surely you would say this. Instead, they run actual experimental studies where they say, we had 500 participants, participants were randomly assigned to get these different cases. And now we can look at how systematically changing certain aspects of these little stories changes people's answers so we can get a deeper understanding of how these concepts actually work. How does the concept of justice actually work? The concept of beauty, the concept of art, the concept of knowledge, and so forth.
Wow, wow, that's tremendous. I appreciate you breaking that down for me. Now, I wanted to ask you about I had seen this online, the Knobe Effect. Is that like a term that you came up with yourself, or what is that about?
So obviously, I wouldn't name something after myself. I don't know who originally named it that, but I can explain what it is. So it's one of these effects that we discovered in this new movement of experimental philosophy. And maybe just thinking about it gives you a sense of what sort of thing experimental philosophy is. It's a kind of discipline that comes up with effects, discovers things like this one. So you can get a basic sense of it by just going through two different little stories. So, first, imagine that the vice president of a company goes to the CEO and he says, okay, we've got this new policy. It's going to make huge amounts of money for our company, but it's also going to harm the environment. And the CEO says, look, I know it's going to harm the environment, but I don't care at all about that. All I care about is just making as much money as we possibly can. So let's go ahead and implement this policy. So they implement the policy, and then sure enough, it ends up harming the environment. And then participants who are in that condition of the experiment were asked, what do you think? Did the CEO harm the environment intentionally, so on purpose? Or did the CEO harm the environment but not intentionally? And in that condition, participants overwhelmingly say that the CEO harmed the environment intentionally. And you might think, well, that makes sense. It's just because he knew that he was going to be harming the environment and he went ahead and did it. So that's why it would be right to say he did it intentionally. But then there's also another condition that a separate group of participants were in. In that other condition, they got a different question. So participants were told a story that was exactly the same, except for that we just changed the word harm to help. So in that condition, participants were told, Suppose the vice president goes to the chairman of the board and says, okay, we've got this new policy. It's going to make huge amounts of money for our company, and it's also going to help the environment. And the CEO says, look, I know it's going to help the environment, but I don't care at all about that. All I care about is just making as much money as we possibly can. So they implement the policy, and sure enough, it helps the environment. Did the CEO help the environment intentionally? So did the CEO do this on purpose? And in that condition, most participants say no, the CEO did not do it intentionally. But the only difference between the two cases is just changing harm to help. So just changing something bad to something good. So what this seems to suggest is that people's moral judgments about whether something is morally bad or morally good, are somehow affecting their judgments about what might seem like it's not a moral question at all. Just the question, did this person do it intentionally or did they do it unintentionally?
Wow, that's major, man. That's major. Like people may say, what is a person's intent behind, the things that they do? That makes a major difference. Um, Now let me see. I wanted to ask you about okay, the self and the dual character concept. If you could kind of speak on that a little bit.
Sure, well, thinking about what a dual character concept is. So the basic idea that we introduced was, I don't know, consider the concept of art. So suppose you go to an art gallery and you see this painting on the wall, and it's a painting that is in the wall of an art gallery, but on the other hand, on the same time, it's something that's just total schlock and has no aesthetic value and was clearly just created in order to get money out of rich people. Now, suppose I ask you about that painting. Is it art? Is this painting art or not art? In that kind of case, you might feel confused. You might feel torn in both directions. So, in a case like that, you might be tempted to say something like, there's a sense in which this thing is clearly art. I mean, it's a painting in an art gallery. Might be bad art, but it's still art. But then at the same time, you might be tempted to say the exact opposite. You might be tempted to say something like, ultimately, if you think about what it really means to be art, this thing isn't even really art at all. Now consider a different kind of case that will illustrate the same thing. So consider something about the concept of being a scientist. So imagine there's this person who works in a physics department. She spends all her days like running experiments, coming up with theories, writing papers. But this person isn't really trying to find the truth about things at all. This person, all she's trying to do is just get as much grant funding as she can, like get lots of promotions. She's just taking some preconceived idea, and even though there's lots of evidence against it, just trying to argue for that preconceived idea because it will advance her career. Is this person really a scientist? In that second case, you might have the same kind of intuition that sort of pulls you in two different directions. So you might say something like, there's a sense in which this person's clearly a scientist, like she's a physics professor. And then at the same time, you might think, well, no, but there's a deeper sense in which maybe ultimately this person's not really a scientist at all. If you think about what it really means to be a scientist, maybe this person isn't a scientist. So dual character concepts are concepts like that. So there are concepts where it seems like we have two different criteria for the concept, the kind of superficial one, and then some deeper one that seems to involve values. I don't know if this is a helpful example to illustrate it, but the recent controversies about Drake maybe really illustrate this. So if you ask, like, is Drake's music really hip hop? Maybe you'd have two different reactions. You'd be like, well, in a sense, it's clearly hip hop. You might not like it, but it's definitely hip hop. But then other people say the opposite. They say, no, but if you think about what it really means to be hip hop, Drake isn't even really hip hop at all. And if you think that kind of thing, you're using the concept of hip hop as a dual character concept.
Wow, that's a great example. You really put that into perspective. Now I can ask you, as a professor, do your students, do they have trouble, understanding these concepts and theories? Is it difficult?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think that's a good question. Is it hard to understand these ideas? One thing that I've been really struck by is that in this particular area, people who are very young, people who are even undergraduate students, have really been making real contributions to the field. So there's something really striking about that. That feels like an area in which even if you're 19, you can start working as a co-author and really collaborating with people and kind of contributing in a way that I think you wouldn't be able to in certain other areas. If you wanted to be a scholar of ancient philosophy, for example, it really feels like you wouldn't be able to do that when you're 19. But a lot of studies indicate that people are wrong when they try to guess whether students really understand. So it might be that my sense of whether students understand is wrong, and that if you really studied my students, you could show that they don't understand as well as I think they do.
Okay, okay, yeah, because I had to ask because I guess sometimes when you look at maybe like a math or a science or other courses, it seems like it's an answer, it's a correct answer or it's not. But when you get into philosophy and psychology, it seems like it might be a little more wiggle room. You had mentioned contributions to the field. Outside of being a professor and the work that you have already done, are you working on any projects currently or
Yeah,
books or?
right now I'm working on a series of studies about why people like sad art. So, so a lot of times, say for example, when you're thinking about music, you might just feel like you're really drawn to sad music. But why is that? Why are human beings so drawn to things that just make them feel bad? Why is it that instead of just listening to happy stuff that just makes us feel better, many of us are really drawn to listen to music or watch movies or read novels that make us feel worse? And my colleagues and I are trying to study that to try to figure out why it is that people are drawn in this way to sad art.
Okay, okay. I mean, that's thought provoking because I know sometimes, like you mentioned, hip hop, for example, some artists I'll listen to more when I want to party, when I want to dance, when I want to have fun, and then maybe if I'm feeling sad, maybe I'm having relationship problems or having an issue with a family member, I'll listen to maybe a deeper artist, a darker artist, or anything in between. So I definitely can see a lot of need for that, definitely.
That's a great example. So, say you're having relationship problems and you're feeling bad, you might think you would want to feel better and that you'd want to hear a song that makes you feel just happy and just allow you to enjoy yourself a little bit. But often people don't. Often people want instead to listen to something that makes them go deeper into the emotion that they're feeling right now, even if that song actually makes them feel bad about themselves. It's quite striking that people would want that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, exactly. So if a person in my family, if they pass away, I'll listen to a song about people who lost loved ones instead of listening to something to make me dance and sing. But I can say this, maybe culture has a lot to do with it. In different countries, the way that they mourn is different. Like for example, I'm in Ghana, so here when a person passes away they may shape their casket in the shape of something that they love, maybe fish, maybe music, maybe television or whatever. All these different types of shapes. So for maybe 2 or 3 days, they'll have a block party. They'll everybody will dress up. They'll play music. They'll dance. So if you was from another country and you just happen to be in the neighborhood, you say, "Oh, they having a party. Let's go stop by there." People, appear to be happy. But in contrast, like in America, it's like we have the funeral, everyone is sad. We may go to that person's house or to the church, and people are continuing to mourn. You know what I'm saying? So it's like the quite opposite.
Wait, that's amazing. I didn't know that. So, do you think when people are at the block party to celebrate someone's life after they've passed, do you think they just outwardly trying to look like they're okay, or that in some way they really are enjoying themselves? How do you think people actually feel?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, maybe they're putting the extra effort into it. But I could say when I first came and I was with some people and I was like, oh, they having a party. It looks like a celebration. It looks like something's fun. And then one of the locals told me they said, no, someone passed away, and when someone dies here, we'll have a party. I mean, they party all night. It'd be 2, 3 in the morning. The music is still playing. The people are still going, and you would think it's a actual celebration, but I guess it's a celebration of life. And then I guess some people are, still sad, but they just trying to carry on the tradition, I suppose.
Wow. That's amazing. It's so different from what we have here. We have in the United States just exactly the opposite.
Yeah, yeah. I'm from America. I'm actually from America, but I'm in
Oh,
Ghana. So I visited I've been to almost 20 African countries. I've been to about 70 countries around the world. So it changes, man, from country to country in just that one aspect, you know.
wait. So the thing that we're studying in our own work, I wonder if that's different in Ghana. So the thing we're studying is not about funerals, but about art. Is it that when people are feeling bad in Ghana, they would often turn to a song that expresses sadness, or would they turn to a song that makes them feel better?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I noticed that too. Like I say, I'm born and raised in America. The music in Ghana in particular, and even some other countries, it doesn't seem to have that much of a range in terms of like American music can be very, very sad. It could be violent. You could talk about anything in American music. You know, we have freedom of speech, but here the selection would be more so dance music, party music, celebration music, maybe some love songs. So I don't think that they have, you know, that range. Like I could point out an artist in particular, like a Tupac. You know, they don't have artists that go that deep. You know, from my understanding.
Wait, that's really interesting. I wonder, do you think it's that it as things get better in the actual life that you're living, and as life gets sort of safer, it's more possible to experience these scarier things in art because you're not trying to feel safe in music because things are just safe around you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, I can say this: Ghana is one of the most peaceful countries in Africa. So Africa has almost 60 countries. So Ghana is like in the top two or three, according to the Global Peace Index. Ghana has, you know, a very low like violent crime rate, low, you know, gun violence, low mass shootings and stuff like that. It is crime here, but it's more like petty crime and scams and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So I think it's related because you know sometimes people say is the art imitating life or is life imitating the art? So is it the chicken or the egg? You know which kind of comes first. So I think it is connected to a degree.
Wait, that makes sense. So that people are less drawn, you're thinking, toward things that are expressing dangerous life because life itself is not that dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, it could be because I think people have, like you say, well, not like you say, but like they say, you could have culture shock. You could go to another country, and you know, for whatever reason, you'll be uncomfortable. But sometimes people have reverse culture shock, to my understanding. So you might be from a place, and you'll go to another place, and you'll see how the people live, and then when you go back home you feel more uncomfortable at home. You want to go back to the the place that you've gotten to know and love. So
But since we were talking about these questions in philosophy, do you feel like going from the United States to all these different countries that you've lived in Africa, do you feel like people feel differently about their lives, about how to live than what they felt when you were growing up in the United States?
yeah, well, it's two parts to it. Like you mentioned, a very important thing. I think perception is one thing. You might perceive that they are happier or they are less stressed or, things of that nature. So by me being an American, and I think a lot of people, they may say the same thing when you go to a country like Africa or a country in Africa like Ghana that is not in like a civil unrest or nothing like that, a place that's kind of peaceful. The people do appear to be happier. They don't seem as stressed out and going through the same type of things that a person in America would go through that may have more access to opportunities or money or technology and things like that. So
That's really interesting that maybe with great opportunities comes great stress. That people just become less chill if they feel like they have this chance to really make it or something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that could make sense too because I know when the Americans come, if the internet goes out or the lights go out, they kind of panic. But the Ghanaians is like, oh, it's no big deal. The internet, it come on when it come on. You know, they more laid back and chill. You know, with everything. You know, they be like, oh, we got to meet at 1 o'clock. They be like, oh, no rush, we'll get there. You know, they'll come late, but you know, nobody is angry with them. And I've seen things like this, like and I guess it's everywhere. People can have like road rage, but I know like here in Ghana, for example, I've seen a person hit another person's car, and they're just kind of like, oh, okay, go ahead. If the car is not totaled, but I'm just saying maybe like you bump somebody's car, they'll kind of keep going. You know, they like, oh, no stress, no stress, it's okay. You know, go ahead. But in America, or at least in Cleveland, you know, where I'm from, people are more, I guess they're more aggressive. You know what I'm saying? So like if I'm in Cleveland and someone steps on my shoe or they bump me, you know, I'm gonna expect that person to acknowledge me, to say excuse me. I'm like, man, you just bumped me. You just stepped on my shoe. You just hit my car. Whereas like in Ghana, they'll just kind of keep going. And if you say something, then they'll say something. Because I had to catch myself because like somebody had stepped on my shoe. I'm like, man, you stepped on my shoe, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry. You know, but they probably been stepping on people's shoe all day. People been stepping on their shoes, so they just didn't, you know, think nothing of it. If
Wait,
that makes
that's really interesting that maybe in America, people don't even consider the idea of just being chill about things like that.
Yeah, yeah, and then it depends too where you from in America, because America is diverse too. Some people from Cali or the West Coast, they might be a little more laid back, but then you go to New York, it's so fast, the people moving, you know. So
Yeah, that's true. And it feels like there's this rise of this feeling like, I don't know, we have to maximize everything or optimize everything. And maybe it leads to a lot of successes in certain ways, but also leads people to just feel stressed out or anxious all the time.
yeah, definitely, definitely, especially post COVID. But yeah, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I mean, this was a great discussion. I know you have very, very important things to do, and this really means a lot to me to have you on the show and to speak about, you know, the great work that you're doing. And I definitely look forward to what you got going on in the future.
Hey, thanks so much. It was really awesome being here. Thank you so much.
All right, now take care. Peace.
Okay, bye.
All right.